Yes, the government recommended diet based on the food pyramid has way too much carbohydrate for any diet that we've ever followed naturally. I'm not sure all the processes that went into the development of that, but one thing is certain, there's no natural existing diet that mimic that. There's no native society that we've ever encountered that followed that kind of a diet.
Late 70s, early 80s, the eat less fat message really started being fed, for lack of a word, to the American public. You know, we cut the fat, everything's going to be better, and beginning at about that same time, the incidence of type 2 diabetes in this country began to go up. And we're not talking a little up now. It's a curve that, well, from your perspective, would look like this. I mean, it's a very, you know, a Thunderbird jet taking off. I mean, it's a very steep climb to that curve. And the kind of dangerous aspect to that is that it's not just, we used to call that adult onset diabetes. We don't call it adult onset diabetes anymore because we see it in 8 and 10-year-olds now that are developing type 2 diabetes in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, who are obese, who are diabetic, who are young. And the adult population is, the numbers are just astronomical for the number of diabetics and pre-diabetics now versus 1980. Where do you begin to talk about the negative effects of sugary and starchy diets, which are actually both the same, because starch is obviously just glucose molecules hooked into long chains. The GI tract immediately breaks them apart, actually starting with spit in your mouth. You can do a little easy experiment. Take a cracker, put a little piece of it in your mouth, and just hold it and let your saliva work on it for a minute, and very quickly it starts to taste sweet, because starting at this very first end of your GI tract, you're changing starch into sugar. So a starchy and a sugary diet is kind of the same thing.
And so, in essence, you're just eating sugar. Now, people say, well, they're complex carbohydrates. And that's true in the sense that they're hooked up as starch. But all starch is a chain of glucose molecules hooked together. And as soon as it hits the GI tract breaks it down into glucose, into basically blood sugar. And that's the GI tract's job, and it does it really well. When it gets a hold of that stuff, it breaks it down, and that's why blood sugar rises really quickly with bread and with potatoes and with rice and with all these starchy foods. And despite the fact that people say they're complex carbohydrates, they really run the blood sugar up almost as quickly as regular sugar.
You know, skim milk with a fat-free bagel and some jelly for breakfast, and a banana. Let's throw that banana in. I mean, it's a breakfast made of sugar.
If you ask most people how much sugar you have in your blood, if you've got normal blood sugar, how much sugar is that dissolved in your blood? People don't have a clue. You know, I'll get answers like a cup or 2 cups. The amount of blood sugar in your blood, if you have a normal blood sugar, is a little bit less than 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of sugar dissolved in your entire blood volume gives you a normal blood sugar.
Well, sugar's actually quite toxic. Glucose is the toxic molecule to the glomerular cells in the kidney, the filtering apparatus in the kidney. And it's toxic to a lot of cells in the body.
Another thing that drives heart disease or drives endothelial dysfunction, which ends up leading to heart disease in a lot of people, is elevated blood sugar. That's why diabetics have a much, much higher rate of heart disease than non-diabetics, because they've got higher blood sugar levels. And blood sugar is absolutely toxic to the endothelium. Now, it's not toxic in normal doses, but it's toxic when you get out of those normal doses. And interestingly, some very good research work has been done looking at blood sugar even within what's perceived as the normal range, and people at the higher end of the normal range have more heart disease than people at the lower end of the normal range when you control for everything else. So blood sugar is a real driving force for the development first of endothelial dysfunction and then heart disease.
The human body was not designed to have its insulin elevated all the time. It was a hormone of emergency as far as blood sugar is concerned. And we're using it to control our blood sugar minute by minute. The control of minute by minute blood sugar should be under the control basically of the liver and of glucagon, insulin's counter-regulatory hormone. We should be having to elevate our blood sugar a little bit during the day by making new blood sugar out of protein. We absolutely should not be having to knock it down after every meal with a big bolus of insulin.
The body wants the blood sugar kept in a very narrow range. Insulin has many jobs, but the most critical in terms of sustaining life is to keep the blood sugar in a really narrow range. If the blood sugar goes up, I mean, we're not going to pitch over on our faces, but if it goes too high, we certainly can. We can develop all kinds of problems quickly, including death. I mean, in the matter of a couple of days, if blood sugar just goes skyrocketing. So insulin, to keep us alive, focuses on the blood sugar really more than anything else, and everything else is secondary. And so what if it's putting fat in the fat cells? It doesn't care if it's keeping blood sugar down.
Humans throughout their history ate foods that were not big blood sugar makers. You know, on a diet that's mostly animal protein and fat and fairly carb poor, and with a fair amount of fiber from the kinds of vegetables that they would have had to eat, the roots and shoots and the nuts and the berries. That's a diet that's designed to keep blood sugar pretty level. In fact, you might have to make some blood sugar. So insulin was there to keep blood sugar from going too high in the event that it ever would, which it usually didn't. It was not a thing that early man had to deal with.
The Inuit Indians, for instance, live off of nothing but whale blubber and seal fat for 6 months out of the year, but have virtually no maturity onset heart disease until they give up that lifestyle and they move into modern cities and they start eating a lower fat diet, and then they develop heart disease at a very high rate. We find virtually no heart disease in other Native Americans that Westerners lived with. We cohabited with them for 200 years or so before they changed their culture. And they didn't even have a word for maturity onset heart disease in the language. It was virtually non-existent. Now some of the highest rates of heart disease anywhere on the planet are in American Indians living in reservations. Some reservations in the Southwest have a 50% diabetes rate among the adults, highest anywhere in the world. I think that's because they made their change from hunter-gatherer diet towards the lower fat, higher carbohydrate intake of the modern West all of a sudden in a single generation.